and some of that we put in place. This is an important day for Canada's workers. Look, we know the world's changing. We know that this decades-long process of our ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the United States has ended. And as a consequence of that, many of our strengths have become our vulnerabilities, particularly in those industries that are most tightly integrated with the United States. Headline, last year, 75% of our exports went to the U.S. 90% of our lumber exports went to the U.S. 90% of our aluminum exports went to the United States. 90% of our steel exports went there, all bound for a single market that has changed. Overall, for the Canadian economy, we estimate that U.S. tariffs and the uncertainty that they're creating will cost Canadians around 1.8% of GDP. That's about $50 billion lost from our economy, or the equivalent of $1,300 for every Canadian. And this is happening fast. It's a rupture, which means that our economic strategy needs to change dramatically and rapidly. And that change is in Budget 2025, our plan to confront these challenges and emerge even stronger, to move our economy from reliance to resilience, and to give ourselves far more than any foreign nation can ever take away. Le budget vise à bâtir un Canada fort en mettant l'accent sur ce que nous pouvons contrôler.
Putting accents on what we can control, which means build here at home to protect Canadians and give them back the means to succeed, stimulate our productivity to assure a prosperity that will be durable, transform the way that the government works, to diversify our commercial partnerships outside North America, to have more possibilities and assure our independence.
The strategy in Budget 2025 is to unleash $1 trillion in total investments in Canada over the course of the next 5 years. That alone will increase our GDP by over 3.5%, or $3,500 for every Canadian worker, more than twice what's being taken from us. Now, to help get there, we must protect our workers and our industries who are most exposed to U.S. tariffs. That means in steel, aluminum, auto, and lumber sectors. Help them bridge to the future. We
already took some decisive measures to limit the exportations of steel from foreign steel to by Canadians, to give our industries to diversify and to conquer new markets, force the workers that are touched by the tariffs of the U.S.
Back in July, we restricted foreign steel imports entering Canada's market, expanded training and income support for steel workers, and provided liquidity relief for businesses. The government, for example, provided a $400 million loan to help Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie to transition to a business model that's less reliant on the United States. In August, we introduced new measures to help the softwood lumber industry stay competitive, including financing for company restructuring, investments to diversify products, income and training supports for affected workers, and prioritizing Canadian lumber in home building. In September, we launched a comprehensive industrial strategy with new reskilling programs, a new $5 billion strategic response fund to help businesses pivot to new markets, and we announced that we would create a new Buy Canadian policy across federal agencies. We also reduced red tape and increased loan limits to help large firms access the liquidity that they need. These measures are working. We've received close to 1,500 applications from companies across the steel, aluminum, lumber, manufacturing, automotive, and seafood sectors through our Regional Tariff Response Initiative. In the steel sector alone, more than 230 firms have applied and support's already being delivered. So some examples. Because of these initiatives, Cherubini Metal Works in Nova Scotia is modernizing its metal and fabrication lines to export more products overseas. And Hooper Welding in Hamilton will grow its capacity to produce fabrication equipment required for Canadian and international energy projects. Grâce à ce financement ciblé, les entreprises canadiennes intègrent
Canadian
de nouvelles technologies,
enterprises
lancent de nouveaux
get some
produits
new
pour
technologies, add
diversifier
new products to
le marché,
diversify
s'assurent de jouer un
the
rôle
market
dans les chaînes
and to play a
d'approvisionnement
role in
nationales
the supply
et, par
chains
ces
nationally
améliorations,
and
participent
improving
à des missions commerciales
participates
partout
to commercial
dans le monde.
missions everywhere in the world.
Our investments are also protecting workers, providing relief to nearly 37,000 Canadians during this period of uncertainty. So far, they've prevented more than 14,000 Canadians from losing their jobs. More broadly, across our economy, employment is rebounding after the early impacts of the trade war. More than 120,000 total jobs have been created since March. What we're doing today is to reinforce that momentum with new strengthened measures to accelerate the transformation of the Canadian steel and lumber industries, to build strong domestic demand for their products, and to empower their workers and businesses to seize new markets at home and abroad. So these new measures focus on three core objectives. First, to further limit foreign steel imports so as to increase domestic demand for Canadian steel producers. Second, to make it easier to buy and build with Canadian steel and lumber. And third, to invest in workers and businesses so they have the tools and the resources that they need to drive this industrial transformation. So let me start with limiting foreign steel imports to ensure that our steel producers have a bigger share of our market. Doing so will unlock hundreds of millions of dollars in domestic demand for those producers. We will reduce tariff-free steel imports from non-free trade area partners from 50% of 2024 levels, as it is today, to 20% of those levels. This will open up more than $850 million in new domestic demand for Canadian steel. Second, we will reduce tariff-free steel imports from non-CUSMA free trade area partners from 100% of 2024 levels to 75% of those levels, unlocking more than $540 million in additional market access for our producers. We'll impose a global 25% tariff on targeted imported steel derivative products, such as wind towers, prefabricated buildings, fasteners, and wires, to grow demand for Canadian-made steel. Those products as a whole represent about a $10 billion market. And we will toughen our broader compliance measures to prevent foreign steel dumping. To do so, the Canadian Border Service Agency will be equipped with a dedicated steel compliance team, enhanced detection of false declarations, and expanded online reporting tools. Our temporary horizontal remission of Canadian tariffs on imports has helped Canadian businesses deal with the early impacts of those tariffs. However, over the longer term, such broad remissions would only hurt Canada's steel sector. So to move away from relying on imported steel and to give Canadian companies time to adjust their supply chains to use Canadian steel, those temporary remission measures will end on January 31st, 2026, for steel used in Canada for manufacturing, food and beverage packaging, and agricultural production. Now, the second broad way to drive transformation of our strategic industries is by becoming our own best customer. So we'll build big with Canadian suppliers, investing in roads, bridges, homes, and community centers. A bit later this year, we'll implement that Buy Canadian policy, which will ensure that Canadian materials, including steel and lumber, are prioritized in all contracts over $25 million, and that this applies across federal grants and contribution programs, especially those in infrastructure. To maximize the use of Canadian softwood lumber in housing and infrastructure, we will prioritize shovel-ready multi-year projects that can begin in the next 12 months using, of course, Canadian wood. With a funding allocation of roughly $700 million next year, Build Canada Homes, our new federal home building agency, this alone will create $70 to $140 million of new demand for Canadian wood products and attract private and provincial capital to multiply that impact. In order to build on that, I'm announcing today that we will make it more affordable to transport Canadian steel and lumber across this country by cutting freight rates for transporting steel and lumber interprovincially by 50%. We'll do that through funding directly Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railways. And finally, we will increase protections for Canadian steel and lumber workers and those businesses so they can adapt and seize new opportunities. We'll help employers retain workers by expanding our earlier supports and enhancing our work-sharing programs, increasing income replacement ratios, income replacement benefits from 55% to 70%. We will also provide an additional $500 million to the Business Development Bank of Canada's Softwood Lumber Guarantee Program to ensure that companies have the financing and the credit support that they need to maintain and restructure their operations during this period of transformation. And similarly, we will deploy $500 million in funding under the Large Enterprise Tariff Loan Facility, specifically for softwood lumber firms, the larger ones facing liquidity pressures. We'll make it easier for the forestry sector to access federal support by establishing a single window for applications, a one-stop shop to help companies navigate our broad suite of support programs. And lastly, we will launch a Canadian Forest Sector Transformation Task Force that seeks input and recommendations from provinces, territories, and industry on how to seize new opportunities in softwood lumber and create new growth in the sector. Ces mesures de soutien jumelées à celles mises en place plus tôt cette année permettront
added to the ones that were previously added to protect the soft lumber and the steel industry for the access to the inside market. It will be hundreds of millions of dollars.
En effet, c'est plus de milliards de dollars.
Actually, it's more than $1 billion.
Elles créeront de nouvelles possibilités pour les
new
travailleurs à
possibilities
mesure
for
que la
the
demande
workers
intérieure
as far as the
augmentera
interior demand
et
will
offreront
increase
aux entreprises le
and
soutien
will give to the businesses the support that they need to adapt to the world context and evolution. We are making sure that Canadian businesses of steel and soft lumber invest the capitals, that what is necessary to have the tools and that will permit them with public funds to build a strong Canadian economy.
The hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure and housing investments that Budget 2025 will unleash will create significant demand for Canadian steel and lumber, as will our new trade and investment partnerships around the world. Last week, I was in Abu Dhabi, where the UAE announced their decision to invest $70 billion in Canada. In Johannesburg for the G20, we launched discussions towards a Canada-South Africa Foreign Investment Promotion and Partnership Agreement that will deepen investment between our two nations. And we agreed to launch comprehensive free trade talks with India, the world's fifth largest economy. Nous avons entamé des négociations commerciales avec
started commercial negotiations with the AAU, with Thailand, and we're working with the deal we can reach with India. This is added to what we concluded in the European Union. The countries of the entire world, they want to invest in Canada and work and build with us. We have some strategic investments so that we can produce and export more, everything that the world needs as far as the soft lumber of Canada and steel.
The Canadian steel and lumber industries will always be at the heart of Canada's competitiveness, our security, and our strength. These are sectors that reflect our country's character, resilient and forward-looking, with a history of reinventing themselves at pivotal moments. Et à ce moment charnière de notre histoire, le Canada passe de la dépendance à la résilience.
History, we have to stop being, we have to be resilient. Then, which not another foreign country could deprive us of. We're building together a project of a national interest. We're realizing unprecedented investments in diversification of our commercial relations.
We'll build Canada strong with the workers and the resources that build our communities strong. Canadian workers, Canadian steel and lumber. With them, we'll build Hamilton strong, Sault Ste. Marie strong, Saguenay fort, Miramichi fort, for Canada for Canada strong. Thank you. Merci. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We're now going to begin the question portion of the press conference. We've got about 20 minutes for question. Première question, Catherine.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Kate McKenna with CBC News. How do you explain to your caucus, particularly caucus members who might be quite hesitant, that your government is going to be working with the government of Alberta potentially towards a pipeline deal?
Well, the first thing is I'm blessed to be a member of a fantastic caucus, a caucus that represents every province in this country, caucus members from the north, the largest women's caucus in Canadian history, the largest Indigenous caucus. So we have a diverse caucus in all respects, and we enjoy a very open and engaged dialogue. And I will say specifically to today's announcement, not tomorrow's announcement, I'll say specifically to today's announcement, that our caucus members in Hamilton, in Sault Ste. Marie, in Quebec, in BC, across this country, in Atlantic Canada, New Brunswick, those caucus members have a very good sense of what's going on in the steel industry, in the forest products industry, and they've helped shape this package, as have members of industry, unions, and others. With respect to tomorrow's intended announcement with Alberta, the Memorandum of Understanding, it is about much more than one thing. It is, and fundamentally, it's about building this economy. It's about making Canada more independent, and it's about making Canada more sustainable. So I would suggest that we wait until the full announcement is made tomorrow so you can see it in the round. En français, en ce qui concerne le caucus,
as far as the caucus,
j'ai eu la chance
d'avoir un caucus to have a caucus that's very diversified, with members in each provinces in Canada, the biggest caucus of women in the history of Canada, biggest caucus of, that we had in history of Canada. It's a very open caucus, and with open discussions in a caucus across the country, British Columbia, Nova Scotia, including Quebec, that is part of this announcement today, because they know the situation in the steel industry and the soft lumber industry. As far as the protocol with Alberta, the announcement for tomorrow, this protocol is bigger than a pipeline. And it's a protocol that will reinforce the Canadian economy and the independence of Canada, reinforce the well-being of our economy. We will discuss all the aspects tomorrow. You can see together.
My follow-up question is on U.S.-Canada trade. You've said that you want to get the best deal for Canada and that you're not rushing to any sort of deal. Do you get the sense that other countries regret the deals that they've made with President Trump?
It's a question for them. Look, I think this is what I'll say about other countries. Every country wants to do a deal with Canada. Or if they have a relationship with Canada, they want to deepen that relationship with Canada. And this is a real opportunity for us. Of course, we want to further improve the existing trading relationship with the United States. We stand ready to re-engage when they are. But at the same time, we're going to do a few other things. First and foremost, build this economy, to be masters in our home, mettre chez nous. And invest to make sure our strategic industries are there when we need them. And then secondly, to develop those commercial relationships abroad. And I think you're seeing, given the scale of agreements that we're concluding and launching, and the time frame, and I'll make one last point and then pass to your colleague, if I may, which is, when we're announcing these free trade deals, for example, with India, the start of the intention for negotiations, or with Thailand or the Philippines as three recent examples. The intention is to conclude these in a year. Okay, this is not let's have a 5 to 8 year long process. Let's focus. Let's take the opportunity. Let's diversify. Let's build out, and that itself will start to seal. We have to conclude these, obviously, but we want to have, and a final point on it, if I can, sorry, I think I've already beyond my final point, but this is one of the many reasons why we want to make sure that we maintain the capacity in our steel industry, in our lumber industry, in our aluminum industry, and other strategic industries, and the workers as much as possible, like in their roles and their jobs, because demand is coming. We're creating that demand, and that's a big part of what this announcement today is about. Merci.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney. Mylène Crête de la presse.
Mylène Crête from La Presse.
Pour l'industrie du bois d'œuvre, pourquoi ne
Why for the soft lumber industry don't you have some salary subsidies like was asked?
Well, au fond, il y a des soutiens pour
there's support for the workers in the soft lumber industry, changing the level of replacement of salaries of the workers, including the steel industry. In this context, it's easier. It's more practical to keep maintain the employment of the individuals. And with the discussions in the sector, the ratio, if I can say it like that, was up to now 55%, and it was too low. We will bring it to 70%, and it will help a lot the advice of societies. That's the first point. My second question. Are you done? Yeah. My second question. Next week, will you go to the USA? Do you expect to meet Donald Trump? Yes. Yes. Yes and yes. There's an event. It's planned to go for the event of the World meeting. We choose our matches, the groups, and selection. You understood. Okay. Yes. We're going to select for the groups for competition. Then we'll have a conversation. We had yesterday a conversation. I had some conversation with him.
No. I conversate, I went back and forth. But look, this is the kind of thing I didn't want to get drawn into, which is every little exchange. You know, there are substantive meetings and conversations and negotiations, and that's not what I'm alluding to be clear. And next week, next week is an important event for Canada because we are one of the co-hosts, as you know, of the World Cup. And I'll be participating alongside President Trump, other co-host, and the FIFA president. There'll be the selections of the countries for the various groups, Canada included, and I'll see the president around there. But again, I don't want to over-signal thing. This is something I'm trying to, you know. What matters is the negotiations when they re-engage. They haven't re-engaged yet, so that's the fundamental point.
Next question.
Sorry, can we wait?
Next question.
Oui.
Michel.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney. Michel Sabat, la presse canadienne.
Oui.
Que
Canadian
dites-vous
press.
aux écologistes
What do you say
compris
to
vraisemblablement
ecologists
dans votre propre caucus,
that
inquiets par l'idée d'un
even in your
projet
own
d'électroduc
caucus are worried about the project of
Demain, il y aura une annonce.
tomorrow there'll be an announcement,
Dans l'annonce.
and there'll be many aspects in the announcement. It's not now before the announcement, but there's many aspects. And second point, as far as all the projects at the national level,
nation building,
the nation building, we must align our climate objectives, including, for example, the projects of GNL and in British Columbia that are the cleaner and sustainable project of the world. So, if there'll be a pipeline, we must have a combination of governmental objectives. But we can discuss all of that.
Question suivie, pardon.
Mais promettez-vous à l'Alberta
But do you promise Alberta to remove the interdiction on the west coast of Sir, it's a good question for tomorrow, but I'm asking it today. But I'll answer tomorrow. I'll answer tomorrow.
Next question. Question.
Hi. Judah Annalise Bloomberg. Today you've announced tariffs today on the U.S. for the first time, or they'll affect the U.S. for the first time since you pulled back retaliatory tariffs. How do you think this will affect the prospects of a trade deal with the U.S., and are you worried about retaliation?
So I think the first thing to say is that what we have done is to put in place adjustments to remissions and tariffs on certain steel derivative products, as you know. And so these are products that, derivatives is a fancy name for products that are substantially comprised of steel. And it is a much more targeted level of that steel than, for example, the United States has done with their steel derivatives, which is quite broad application. The U.S. looks to calculate the proportions in steel. That approach is global. It's global. It's not targeted at the U.S., okay? So that's the first thing that's very important. So it's a global approach, which is creating some space for Canadian steel producers to fill in. First point. Second point, with respect to the changes we're making in tariffs, so for non-free trade countries, going from 50% to 20%, the sort of tariff rate quota. This is Bloomberg, so I can talk like that, right? And for free trade countries, going from 100 to 75%, the U.S. is not included in that. So there's no change in the tariff for the U.S. or for Mexico in that regard. So I think that answers the question.
On ending the remission, I'm wondering why you chose January 31st, and is this an attempt to add pressure to the U.S.?
No.
Or is it an acknowledgement that you're not going to get a deal?
I'm going to reinforce. It is a global approach, It is a global approach. And what it is, January 31st, is a judgment based on our working with companies that use these products and the time in which it can take Canadian companies to ramp up and fulfill that demand. So you don't do it overnight because people have certain relationships, certain contracts as a consequence of that. But you also don't do it a year from now or else it doesn't have any benefit for the Canadian industry. I mean, this is, it's $10 billion of market share that potentially, or of demand, the steel proportion of that potentially can be captured. So that's the timing is based on the adjustment timetable. There's no signal. There's no signal to any country in the world. It's just there's a signal to Canadian buyers of steel and Canadian producers of steel that there's an opportunity. Yeah.
Next question. Question, Kissin.
Hello, Sol Paul Dutch, Global News. When it comes to lowering import quotas for foreign steel imports, are you concerned about any potential retaliation from countries like China?
Well, look, we have we've re-engaged with China and in a very positive way, and the starting of a broader discussion of amongst other things, our broader trading relationship. There's this sector, there's clean energy sector, there's a series of important issues on the agricultural side, the seafood side, there's opportunities for Canada on the lumber side, et cetera, et cetera. And so those discussions will continue, and it's part of a broader relationship. But look, if you look at what's happening in the world, given the changes, the fundamental changes in tariff policy, you see a number of jurisdictions starting to make adjustments because of the reallocation of capacity. I'll just refer to the European Union currently has proposals around restricting free trade partners to 50% or 48% to be precise, of their previous levels. So,
Follow-up?
And to clarify, when you go to the U.S. next week, apart from the FIFA draw, will you be looking to officially restart trade talks with the U.S. again?
Look, it's, again, I don't want to over-dramatize it, so I will repeat that we are ready to re-engage on those talks when the United States wants to re-engage. Nous sommes prêts de recommencer les discussions avec les Américains en ce qui concerne des secteurs stratégiques.
These strategic sectors,
Les Américains
when the Americans will be ready.
Next question.
It's Annie Bertrand-Oliver with CTV National News.
Yep.
I'm just wondering if Canadians should interpret today's announcements as a concession that there's no deal in the near future for the steel and lumber sectors.
You should interpret the announcement that this government will do whatever it takes to protect our sectors, and not just protect them, but to help them reposition for the new global economy, and help them be in a position to build this great country. And we need these sectors to build this country. We're going to build this country at a scale and at a pace, and we need the strong sectors. So we're positioning, this is part of positioning the sector for that.
You mentioned in French that you had a conversation with Donald Trump over the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that, please? And also, when you go to Washington next week, will you bring up with him the pain that our sectors are currently facing and talk about re-engaging?
I'll bring up with him what I bring up with him when I see him. These are points I do make to him. My exchange with the president yesterday was not newsworthy.
So it wasn't about...
I just responded to a question, wasn't newsworthy. How's that?
Next question.
I think that's for us to decide, though.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question.
Bonjour, Adrienne
Bonjour.
de Radio-Canada.
Adrienne,
Pourquoi ne pas avoir consulté
why
le caucus de la Colombie-Britannique
did you
avant de
consult
conclure l'entente
your
avec
BC
l'Alberta?
caucus before confirming the deal with Alberta? Like I said a few minutes ago, we have a process of caucus that's very open, a lot of discussion. I'm aware of the issues in British Columbia. I had conversation with them. And I was there 10 days ago, I think, in British Columbia. So we have to make decisions. How you want to keep the cohesion in your caucus? I think I've already answered this question, and I think I can repeat. We have a caucus that's open, diverse, that's solid, with very good exchange of ideas, of the worries and issues. And like I said, for example, for the announcement of today, it's been well informed by members of the caucus.
Hi, this is Catherine with the Canadian Press. Speaking about today's announcement, I'm wondering if you can share why these measures were not included in the federal budget and if the tariff quotas announced in July didn't go far enough.
Well, I think what we've seen, let me start with the second bit of that, which is that the adjustments, for example, there's been additional tariff measures that have been put on by other countries, for example, the United States with respect to steel derivatives. That process has come into force and has broadened, so that has had knock-on impacts on the sector. So that's one big reason, and in fact, that would almost be a sufficient reason to justify, plus the additional U.S. tariffs on lumber. So you have those aspects, and then, as I alluded to in one of the earlier answers, you see knock-on effects of what's happening in the U.S. and elsewhere on tariff measures that other countries are taking, or jurisdictions in this case. The European Union would be one example. So all of that sort of comes back onto Canada. First, that's the first, and that's kind of enough. Secondly, you learn things as we have facilities in place, the ease with which companies are able to pull down the money, draw down the money, the terms. So we should always be looking at that, learning, adjusting, and that's part of what we've done. Some of this is simplification as well, but I think as well is that pulling that together. Informed by discussions with industry. For example, Mr. Bedard is here, but also other members of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, discussing with those CEOs about what's going on in their companies, what would make a difference to them. And so we craft something that keeps the market as fluid as possible, as much efficiency as possible, but also makes the biggest impact. And so that's the consequence of that. And the government is not going to produce a budget and then take the next year off. We're going to continue to move.
Last follow-up, Catherine.
Thank you. And you're promising to subsidize interprovincial rail costs for steel and lumber. But what about the north, where there are no railroads and much of the building materials sail by boat? I'm wondering if the government is committed to extending the same subsidy to those territories where construction costs are exponentially higher.
Well, first off, thank you for asking a question about the territories. This is an issue. The short answer is that the rail subsidy, the 50% cut in the rail costs, is I mean, it theoretically would extend to the north, but practically doesn't because, as you just said, and we have issues with transport. There's lots of issues with transport costs for the north, and one of the things that we're doing is looking at where are the biggest areas where we can reduce. And we made an announcement 10 days ago on the major projects, and part of that, I'll finish with this, on the Iqaluit Hydro. What that is saving is, tens of thousands of tons of diesel being trucked up, or not trucked up, boated up, with detriment to the environment, but also just huge transportation costs. We're moving to clean power in situ and being built out. So a lot of the infrastructure, it will take some time, but is to address those types of issues as well in the north. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Prime Minister. This puts an end to our press
beaucoup.
conference. C'est ce qui met fin à notre conférence de presse. Merci.
Okay, we've been listening to Mark Carney speaking to reporters in Ottawa just now. A wide-ranging press conference, but focused on supports for both the steel and lumber industries. The primary points he made was that we are going to be our best customer in Canada. He's going to implement a Buy Canadian policy, which will apply to federal contracts over $25 million, and that they want to move away from relying on imported steel. So the details on imported steel means that he's going to limit foreign steel imports from 50% of 2024 levels to 20% of 2024 levels and impose a global 25% tariff targeted to steel derivatives. Those are products that are largely made of steel. He's going to provide support for workers in both the steel and lumber industries. Income replacement will increase from 55% to 70%. He's going to cut freight rates so that domestic produced steel can move more easily across the country. He's going to cut those rates by 50%, he said, and he's going to create a Canadian forest sector transformation task force to look at ways that there can be innovation and create growth in the softwood lumber industry. Just briefly, before we speak more about those supports for the steel and lumber sectors, Trump did speak about, Carney spoke about going to meet with Trump, next week. He confirmed that that visit is indeed happening, that he will be speaking with President Trump next week. He alluded to a global meeting somewhat related to the World Cup and FIFA. No clear details there, but he did say he did not want to over-signal things, that negotiations have not re-engaged yet. And lastly, he spoke briefly about the pipeline announcement that is going to be happening tomorrow. He did not want to speak about details. He deflected all comments about that for tomorrow, but he did say on environmental concerns that have been raised, he said we must align our climate objectives with that of a pipeline. So addressing the fact that there is some objection from British Columbia there, also concerns about the engagement of coastal First Nations. Those details, he says, will be coming tomorrow. But looping back to the headline of today, and Prime Minister Mark Carney talking about new supports for Canadian steel and softwood lumber. Joining me now to speak more about that is Peter Warrion. He's the former research director with the United Steelworkers. Nice to see you today, Peter.
Good to see you.
Was today's announcement of supports enough?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that, if I understand correctly, he's going to reduce the level of imports by 25 or 30%. There's several aspects to it, but that's what it seems to come out to. That is important, and I think that would be very much welcomed. There's also by Canadian policies that are important. But to return to the tariffs, what I heard somewhat differently, the first round of the tariffs in July applied to other countries, but not to countries who had free trade agreements with Canada.
Correct.
Part of this new program would apply to those. So an example would be Argentina, that has a free trade agreement with Canada. There have been issues there with dumping of steel in the past. So we're going to get some coverage in that area, which I think is one of the main places that the company said there was a gap in what happened in July. It seems to be we're closing that part. I think that's probably welcome news. I would just add another thing. I think there's going to be a second shoe to drop on this in the new year. In the new year, the European Union will start to apply, you can call it a carbon tax, a carbon border adjustment, i.e. there will be adjustment and a tariff put on if you don't meet the same environmental standards that we do. That's important because there's a huge transition, getting rid of old blast furnaces and bringing on these new electric furnaces. But that imposes major costs on the companies. And we can't expect our Canadian companies to be bearing that cost when somebody else is going to just dump steel in without that. So that's, I think, the second shoe to drop on this.
You're right on that point, just to be clear. So this is for countries that do not have free trade agreements, but for non-CUSMA free trade agreements, there is another condition that is meant to reduce how many imports are taken from those countries, opening up what Carney described as a $540 million market. So $850 million in one pocket and $540 million in another pocket. The question is, will that $1.3 billion be enough to shore up an industry that is really bleeding right now?
Well, shipments in the industry are down by 25 or 30%. I'm not saying the numbers magically match, but this is certainly important relief. But I said, in terms of the longer term, the future, when you start to tie tariffs to environmental standards, that starts with the European Union in the new year. And that's a second part of all this that I expect will come up again.
Can our domestic product meet the needs that we have in Canada? If we're shipping steel products across the country, can it meet the needs that we have right now?
I think it can, but we've got these new projects that he's announcing, infrastructure and mines and that, and defense. These are all steel intensive. So I think if you next 3 to 5 years, this demand for steel the demand in the market will be pretty good looking, and that will require some expansion. One specific thing, if you're building bridges and such, you need plate, big plate steel, and that's an area where we have to directly expand our capacity going forward.
Peter, appreciate your time and your insights. Very timely today, in fact. Peter Warrian, former research director of the United Steelworkers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to turn now to Washington, D.C., where we have some breaking news. Police say a suspect is now in custody after 2 National Guard soldiers were shot near a metro station that's close to the White House. And now